Here is a very simple simulation of how a camera works. If we wanted to shoot this scene here, we can get away with that with using something as simple as a pinhole camera, which is effectively a box with a hole in it. And the concept is that the light beams coming in from our subject will shine through to the back of the camera, and there it will make an image. And in old style cameras, we would put on the back of the camera box a piece of celluloid coated with a photosensitive film. Nowadays, of course, digital cameras use light sensitive diodes, and it's a whole different ballgame with many advantages. Now, the only control we have over this camera is whether we shut this hole or open it, and we can do that as simply as sticking our finger across the hole, or we can stick a cork on it or a piece of masking tape or whatever. We use a pair of shutters, and the idea is that these shutters currently have the hole shut so no light gets in, and as they slide across and there's a gap between them, the hole is no longer shut off, and then the second shutter will in fact shut the hole off again. And the way we determine this exposure setting is to adjust the gap between these shutters. So the further apart they are, then the longer the exposure is going to be between the time that hole is shut and open. Having a pair of shutters means that we are not just using one shutter to close the hole, then open it and then close it again, which would actually, if you think about it, expose one side of the image more than the other. So these are our shutters, and the shutter speed is determined by the gap between those two. Giving a longer or shorter exposure. The next thing we can control is the size of the hole in the box, and this would let more light in. Now, in practice, we use a mechanism which we call an aperture, and it's a series of intersecting blades, and we can adjust the size of the hole in that. These normally move in discrete steps, and we call these f-stops. Now you can see that f2 is in fact the largest hole, f4 this hole gets smaller, f5 smaller still, f11 smaller still, and f22 is very small. Now obviously that has a corresponding effect on the film in the camera, because the smaller the hole, then the less light gets through. So let's crank up our f-stops and see what happens. As I go to f2, you can see the image is now fully bright, and as I go f4 it gets dimmer, f5 gets dimmer still, f11 gets dimmer, and f22 there's not very much light getting through to the film or LED sensors on the back of our camera. So the aperture can be used to control the amount of light getting into the camera. However, there's another side effect of using the aperture, which is that it will affect your depth of field. And at f4, this depth of field will increase. At f5, it will increase further. And this is the area of our shot which will be in focus. Anything between that and the camera will be out of focus, and further away will be out of focus. As we move towards f11, we're getting a very long depth of field, and f22, in reality, we're probably getting all the way to infinity. Although in this model, I've tried to keep it simple so that you can see the difference. So as the aperture begins to open, the depth of field gets shorter and shorter. So this would be a good way to keep just your subject in focus and the background completely out of focus. Now, other things will affect this depth of field too, including lenses. And we'll look at lenses next. Now, the next level of sophistication we might want with a camera is to put a lens in front to help focus our light. And this can make a difference to our camera in terms of the distance that that lens is from the film at the back of the camera. This is known as our focal length. And lenses like these will give us a difference in how far we can see too. So you can have zoom lenses or telephoto lenses. Now, as well as being able to move our lens back and forth towards or away from our film, there's a simple thing that you might not realise, that is, if you reverse a lens, instead of having a telephoto effect, it works the opposite way and allows you to take close-ups. So this might be the principle on which we build macro lenses. And of course, you could use lenses in combination. Generally, these lenses would be enclosed in a light-proof case. So you can see that our pinhole camera is starting to evolve into something that looks a bit more like a camera. Now, people often talk about 3 legs on the stool when you're referring to photography. And one of the final things I'd like to look at is the sensitivity of the film itself. And this is known as the ISO. And we can increase the ISO setting, which will increase the sensitivity of the film. In other words, it will make it faster to respond to any given exposure. An ISO setting like 100 might be quite dark. As you go up to 200, then 400, 800, 1600, maybe even 3200. That will allow you to adjust the sensitivity of your film, or in a digital camera, the LEDs at the back of the camera. And all of these things would allow you to compensate for the light in the scene. So as it turns to night, you could increase your aperture, or your ISO, or your exposure. And as it comes back to full daylight again, then you can adjust these settings accordingly.